All right. Welcome, everyone, to Next in Video Game Fashion from the extensive Glamour collections of Final Fantasy XIV, which you can play for free up to level 60, to indies like Bravery Network Online. There is a world of fashion in games that is growing, that is flourishing, and influenced by fashion that we experience in our real lives. And we're going to be taking a little bit more of a deep dive with it today. We've got three wonderful developers here ready to talk about fashion in games and how it's influenced their work. So before we dive into that, let's start off with having them introduce who they are and a little bit about what they do. So Joel, would you like to go first?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Joel Davison. I'm a Gadigal and Dunguddy man coming at you from Woiwurrungland. And I've done many things. I am studying game development at the moment. I've worked at Commonwealth Bank. I've worked with Google on art for their new building, and Midnight Oil recently on one of their new tracks, Gadigal Land. And yeah, I'm here to talk about fashion.
Yay. So, Ben.
Hi, I'm Benjamin E. I work as an art director for Summerfall Studios. We're making a course and adventure musical. So be keen and be on the lookout for that. But essentially, I work on the aesthetics of the game, and I'm ready to talk about fashion and how that influences everything.
And Izzy.
I'm an independent games from originally from Adelaide, just working on my own game called Intergalactic Space Princess, which is like a magic game, kind of influenced by Magical Girls. And on the side, I guess I do a bit of photography, and actually kind of got my start in photography like 10 years ago, just way back doing a bit of fashion photography. And yeah, it's pretty much, and I guess I do a bit of music stuff to the side.
Awesome.
Hell yeah.
Yay. And for those of you, I'm Jenny Windom. I will be moderating and helping host and facilitate this panel. And my background is in game dev. I am currently making a game called Spirit Swap, Lo-Fi Beats to Match 3-2 with the wonderful team at Soft Knot Week. And it is highly influenced by fashion and color and just wonderful spectacle. So super excited to be chatting with you all today. So before we dive into your selections and the specifics that what you're going to share, I wanted to ask a question to you all just to sort of prime the wheels a little bit, and get your opinions on how you think the worlds of video games and fashion have evolved over time in relation to each other. I think it's one of those things, especially at least when I was younger and growing up, that was not something that was seemed to be explicitly connected, but more and more. Yeah, I won't say more and more. I'll say what do you all think?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, fashion and games have been interconnected, in the same way that, fashion is, I wrote this earlier, fashion is like sort of like the meta, the meta of the real world of just like what, it reflects sort of like the ideals of like, of societies and culturally, and I think the games that are developed in that are also reflecting within that because it's like within the same sort of context. So there is a lot of interconnection. Maybe there wasn't so much about the appreciation of like high brands or super aesthetics at the time, but it's really interesting because in all sort of like medias made, you can sort of tell the time of which they were made because of the fashion choices that they've made, because it reflects what they thought was good at the time, So yeah, it's fashion's everywhere, baby. Can't get rid of it.
Joel, did you want to go or should I?
Oh, you can. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, sorry. So I think. Wait, what was the question again?
Oh, just
I'm so sorry.
no, not at all. Fashion and video games. How has it evolved
Right.
over time for you?
So I I think the biggest difference now between games, as Ben was saying, like in the early 90s, is instead of like having unfashionable characters, it's like unfashionable by choice. And I think there's a huge difference in that thing because like if you look at like a lot of the games coming out of the 90s, a lot of it's kind of, I don't want to say like more costume, but it was more like time period. But then you've kind of got your like Final Fantasies creeping in, which was kind of influenced by like a lot of street fashion and whatnot. And then you've got even like characters like Lightning doing like collaborations with like Louis Vuitton and whatnot. So it's kind of like that has crept in. And I think in the same way, even looking at like TV shows, even though there was like shows that did have like a fashion influence, like say The Nanny or whatnot, or like movies like Clueless, it wasn't until the like 2000s that brands kind of like really understood, hey, this is a medium that we can use to like sell product and like collaborate. And I think that is kind of starting to creep into games a little bit. So that's kind of the way how I've seen it. And I think it's also like a lot easier because of like things like Google image search to see like, oh, what was the like Valentino collection from like 2006 or whatever. Whereas before, like if you look at like the 90s, like how do you have access to that? So that's probably my take.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think video games have come a long way in terms of both appreciation and commercialization. I think as the subculture of gaming becomes more commercialized, so too do other industries see the opportunity there to creep in and grab a bit of that. And you can see that a lot in collaborations like Louis Vuitton collaborating with Square Enix and also Riot more recently. And, you know, in Fortnite, we've had Supreme and more recently Balenciaga announced a collaboration with Fortnite. But the truly interesting part for me is how the appreciation for fashion has grown. And I think at first it was driven by a need for interesting character designs. You know, Final Fantasy 7 and 8 in the 90s kind of shook things up a lot. I think, at least when it comes to representing fashion in the 3D space. But there was a really great positive feedback loop where seeing interesting character designs in terms of fashion stoked the interest in fashion in people who played the games and developers who played the games and went on to develop other games. And then that appreciation for fashion drove those character designs, which inspired more people. And yeah, it's a really beautiful feedback loop. And one of my examples later on is a really great example of that, but you can see it in, you know, so many designers going from one game to another, how their fashion appreciation evolves.
Yeah, it's like it reminds me a lot of I think it's Tetsuya and Nomura who doing Kingdom Hearts and stuff, or just the whole like super belt aesthetic, you know, that sort of has evolved over time. But I remember that was a specific era. It was like fucking belts, yeah.
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 That's awesome. Yeah, I very much remember that era. I wanted to dress in belts always.
Oh my god, I wanted to see how many belts could fit on my body.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I remember like Lulu from Final Fantasy X with the belt dress, and I was
the belt,
that just,
the peak.
like, we can't go anywhere from that. Sorry, Izzy.
Character becomes a belt.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like the Netflix fashion show that inspired the name of this panel, I thought it would be nice to take on the theme, because every good fashion show needs a theme to help bring the collections together. And so today the theme is inspiration, and what has inspired you as developers and as artists, and how that's taken you in your work into different avenues and different roads. And so for everyone who's watching, each panelist has come up with a topic and a foundational inspiration for their work, and they are going to be diving into that today. So we'll be exploring characters and couture, and I'm super excited to hear what everyone has to say. So I think, Joel, did you want to kick it off for us?
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
I will also share my screen for the people in this chat. Yeah, so my very first example that I have of, I think, a moment that really awakened my interest in fashion was a little game in the 2000s called The World Ends With You. I believe it came out 2007. I don't think I played it until 2008, 2009. And, you know, I had been really big into the Squanex brand of JRPGs and really appreciated the fashion in those. But it wasn't really until The World Ends With You that it hit me that fashion is a culture. And the thing about this game that really did that for me was that the entire game was centered around the location that that fashion culture was built from. It's centered around Shibuya, Tokyo. And it really reeks of appreciation for the people who live there and present their style and their fashion, and the designers who take inspiration from that place and that culture and feed directly back into it with their own unique designs. There are a couple of, unique mechanics in the game that reminded me a lot of my trip to New York, walking through Soho and seeing all of the different boutiques and sort of the crossover that they had with each other in terms of the brands and styles that they stocked. In The World Ends With You, the progression system is tied to exploring Shibuya and picking up different pins from different designers, and different boutiques would sell, different pins from different brands, but similar brands to boutiques that were kind of similar. It was really, really cool. And, it does play a little bit into the commercialization of fashion aspect. It's all about, buying into certain brands. But it really started to get me to think about how different brands aren't just a name, they're a design lineage. It has the DNA of the designers and the history of those brands flowing through them. And yeah, I think when games take inspiration from fashion, they don't often give much back to the culture that they're taking inspiration from, outside of that positive feedback loop that I was talking about earlier. But The World Ends With You really does feel like a love letter to Shibuya and the really fashionable culture that lives there. So that's why The World Ends With You is my first one. It was the first one that, had me thinking about it seriously. This is a nice photo from my trip to Shibuya.
That's great.
Oh, very good.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think that was Takeshita Street, and it's very similar to the game. You can just dip into a back street and you're kind of in another world. You're immersed in a different subculture. Did anyone else here play World Ends With You?
Yes.
I did, yeah.
I loved that game. And it was a fashion awakening, I think, to some level.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got to get my hands on Neo.
I think I didn't register at the time that it was so fashion forward, but when you just love the world that it is in, and I don't know, it just felt so natural, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sorry, you go, Ben.
No, sorry. I was just gonna say, The World Ends With You. I distinctly remember. I wasn't super fashion forward at the time, but I remember just being like, it really does encapsulate a full culture very well, and the street aesthetic was so filled to the brim in that game, and you could really feel the sort of aesthetic and culture and sort of like time that they were going for, and it felt really alive. I feel like that's a really good word to say. It was like it felt alive, you know.
No, that's absolutely true. It was kind of it wasn't just the clothes and the style divorced from the context. It was the whole living, breathing organism that the fashion was a part of.
Yeah,
precisely. Yeah, that was my first one. My second one, my second example that really inspired me was Deus Ex: Mankind Divided. Human Revolution looked great, but Mankind Divided.
Sorry, this is a topic that I always going to talk about. I'm so sorry for interrupting you, but I love the fashion in this game and Gareth Fu and Rick Owens, and thank you so much for talking about it. Sorry.
No, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that I'm not the only one shouting about this, but yeah, the designers that fed into this had been on my radar for many years before Mankind Divided came out, and sort of Acronym in particular, who were brought on board to design Adam Jensen's coat that you can see here. Acronym is headed by one Errolson Hugh, formerly known as your favorite designer's favorite designer. And Acronym as a studio has a very distinct, vision of the future that's reflected in their clothes. And that vision very clearly, drove a lot of the designs that went into the how people dress and look in the Deus Ex world. Yeah, it's Deus Ex, I think, first and foremost gives us a really good and realistic, potentially not realistic, but a plausible look at how people might dress in a future. Maybe not our future. But yeah, sort of took futuristic designs and grounded them. I think at its core, it was able to ground them and make them seem plausible because of the inspiration that they took from contemporary designers. And it was here that I wanted to talk about the dissemination of fashion styles, where like you have bleeding edge designers like Errolson Hugh and Rick Owens who make these really expensive, high fashion pieces that cost way more than 95% of humans can reasonably afford. But it's those designs that will then inspire large retailers to sort of make those designs more economical and appealing to the mainstream over time. So you can imagine a future where, the slightly more outrageous designs become more economical and more palatable and start creeping into the mainstream.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's actually really interesting. Deus Ex, in particular, Mankind Divided, and the sort of like more modern readaptations of the series, was really interesting because it's a lot of people describe it as like cyberpunk because it's like future-esque. It's like bleeding technology. But I think like where cyberpunk focuses on a lot more like the question of robot versus human, like how much of a robot do you have to be until you stop becoming human, like the cybernetics side of things. But Deus Ex Mankind Divided did talk about that, but its aesthetic was based in Renaissance, which is really interesting because like I remember those trailers of like Adam and stuff like being compared to Icarus and that like beautiful gold lighting aesthetic that they were going for. And there's a lot of designs in that game that reflect sort of like, what if it wasn't about, the dystopia of like cybernetics and it was instead about a golden age of technology and fashion combined, And so
absolutely.
So a lot of those designs are like really interesting because it blends what we expect from the future in with what has happened in the past, which is really interesting because everyone knows fashion is cyclical. Yeah. So
Yeah.
So just like to see something come from the past and repurposed into the future, it was really cool and really interesting.
Yeah. 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 It's super interesting to see the evolution, the dissemination, both in video games and real life. And I'll actually go to my next slide for this.
Oh, look at that.
Whoa.
After Deus Ex Mankind Divided, Hideo Kojima and Errol Hughes started hanging out together, and that heavily affected the look of Death Stranding as well, which was mwah. Director's cut, I think, comes out in like a day or two.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
As of time of recording. But yeah, it's really interesting to watch the journey go from, acronym as an obscure high concept designer to, influencing the futuristic fashion of Deus Ex, and then now really be brought into the mainstream with games like Death Stranding. The same thing kind of happened in the fashion space, where acronym, the 2009 collection really inspired me. I did a unisex coat kind of inspired by that collection in 2010 for my my design and technology class. And since then, Errolson, who has collaborated with Nike for their Nike Lab ACG collection. And as mentioned, Adidas has collaborated with Y3 and Rick Owens since then. And now those Adidas collaboration and Nike collaboration designs are really being disseminated into stores like H&M and Uniqlo and Target. So it's over. I've watched it filtered down over 12 years to the point where you can kind of see that DNA in big retailers nowadays. And you're absolutely right, Ben. I love that Deus Ex isn't necessarily cyberpunk because there's less punk DNA in it, but it is kind of like cyber renaissance, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Cyber Renaissance is really good. Oh my god, you've invented some cool words. Hell yeah. Yeah, the cyberpunk aesthetic of just like dirt and grimy, we're in the future and things are not looking good. And yeah, like the cyber renaissance where it's more just like more of an understanding of like where we would blossom into if like when there would be, more time to focus on the aesthetics of things, like, and everyone having that available to them and sort of seeing where like art can flourish when we don't have to deal with other stuff, the grim bad stuff.
Yeah. It is interesting to think about, first of all, the Deus Ex world being a world where Errolson, who was perhaps retro.
Yeah, like that's old news. Throw it out.
Oh, Dad. Oh, come on, put that away. But also, really interesting to think about, like how Deus Ex gives us a vision of the world where that like the high fashion concepts are more accessible, but video games as a space where those concepts are more accessible because you don't have to pay $1,000 for a pair of pants. You pay 60, $90 for a video game, and you get to look at all of the fashion in the video game, and potentially dress your character up in it, or like Final Fantasy 14 free until level 60, including the award-winning expansion Heaven's Ward, where you can dress your character up in amazing, incredible fashion.
We love fashion in games. That character customization, being able to dress up your avatar, you gotta look good. You gotta look good. When you fight those dragons, you gotta look good.
My third example is a more recent one, and this is something that's really inspired me personally. But it is one skin in Rainbow Six Siege, and that's Habana's elite skin. And the name for this skin is Onkot Shishin, which means exploring the new while learning lessons of the past, vaguely. That kind of vibe.
Very cool.
And this really inspires me to think about how to respectfully bring in designs from a character's culture and heritage, and place it in a modern context. And I'm not going to say like a utilitarian context, because in this case, it has to be incredibly utilitarian. She's an incredibly professional operator who has a job to do, but place it in a context where it makes sense, to be able to move about and do what needs to be done while still paying homage to their past. And the render in the middle here is her default skin. The Onkot Shishin skin is designed considering the traditional garb of the Yumibo bowman. And I'm not, as a non-Japanese person, I'm not qualified to say that this is really respectful and well done, but I can see the consideration there. And it really inspires me to think about my own culture and how I can respectfully move forward and place, my designs in a modern context while learning everything that I can from my ancestry and bringing that into a modern context.
Hell to the goddamn yeah. Sorry.
No, it's so good. All of this is to say that these three examples have been a really long-winded way of saying that I really like Manifold from the current running X-Men comics new redesign, and I think there's a lot of room to improve, but I'm loving it. Those of you who don't know, Manifold is a indigenous Australian mutant who has worked with the X-Men and been an Avenger and is doing big things in comics currently.
Holy shit.
That's
Hell
so
yeah.
cool.
I didn't know that. Yeah, very
he's
cool.
wicked.
Awesome.
I
But
think it's
there's a
really
lot of
interesting.
examples. Oh, sorry, Ben, you go.
Oh, that's all right. I was just gonna say, yeah, it's like the introduction of like, yeah, because like fashion is like is a product of like the culture, and like introducing more of like the traditional sort of aspects of it and into a new perspective in the modern lens of the camera, is really fascinating, and just like seeing how things have been reinterpreted or like pay homage to reinvigorate an aesthetic, which is super sick.
Yeah,
so
it
cool.
sort of, I think, results in a lot of designs that just wouldn't exist and yeah, shows us a way forward that doesn't leave anyone behind, I think, as well.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Very cool.
Awesome.
But Ben, I believe it's your turn to show us what you got. Oh, I do need to say, I'm not a visual artist, so I don't necessarily have any of my own work to show you how I've folded all of this in. I was almost about to launch a small clothing design brand just before the pandemic hit, but that's sort of been on hiatus since.
Oh no!
Getting it as far as almost launch.
Yeah. There's very interesting conversations we had about that, but for now, my goal is I'm studying game development, and I may be doing some game development streams, and I'll plug my Twitch later. You may be able to see some of that folded in the future, but I don't have any visual artwork to show you.
So exciting.
Very
Awesome.
cool.
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, Ben, I think you're up next. Excited to see what you brought as your sources of inspiration.
Joel, you knocked it out of the park, and I am going to admit right now, I fully misunderstood the assignment. I did not get it, so I'm going to share what I got instead.
Hey, it's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I can't wait. I can't wait to see.
Blessed. All right, I'm going to share this screen for you right now. Let me know if you guys can see it.
Yes.
All good?
Yes.
All right. Well, yeah. So I interpreted it in a sort of different way. This is my little cheeky little presentation that I've got going on. So for me, it was a bit difficult to think of like the games that have influenced me in the past, because it's almost just like a full visual library that's been collected over time. You know, like the consumption of media sort of collects itself all together. And so like just thinking, I wasn't Joel Davison, you know, large brain thinking of all these like, you know, games specifically like The World Ends With You or Deus Ex Mankind Divided. It was just like, what designs did I think were really cool? And that's the thing, is the way I choose to explore fashion in the same way that I would choose to explore design in most scenarios. Like in video games, the games that I play are lots of fantasies. Swords, we love swords, knights and all, you know, that sort of stuff, which doesn't lend itself a lot to street fashion. And so there's not many lessons that I can interpret from the games that I play into sort of the clothing items that I wear. And so so the way I interpreted this assignment was more about like how like have I interpreted like designs of like characters and how those design choices have influenced the things that I make today. And so let's get to it, shall we?
For what it's worth, I think that's a perfect interpretation.
Oh, blessed. Thank God, because I'm sweating bullets over here.
Swords can also be fashion.
Yes.
Swords can be fashion. Oh my God. The day that swords and gauntlets and pauldrons come into fashion,
Yes.
I will awaken. My eyes will glow. I'll start floating in the air.
There was a bit of a sword moment at the Met Gala.
Oh yeah, the Met
was, yeah.
Grimes. Grimes had a sword, and I was like, that's the good one.
It's
I
our
want
time
more of
now.
that. It's our time, yeah. Rise. But for my first example, I had Vincent Valentine from Final Fantasy VII. As you can see, belts everywhere. This was, I remember this. I don't know. I actually never played Final Fantasy VII. Oh my God, I'm so twisted in the head. But I actually played, my first Final Fantasy game was actually Dirge of Cerberus, which I hear is widely hated. But I had a good time. Hey, I had a good time. And it was my first introduction to Vincent Valentine, who I thought was fully sick. That was around the time when, I was super into like edge aesthetics. And Vincent Valentine just ticks off all those boxes, don't you think? We've got, really sharp sort of angles. The hyper detail found in the tattered cloak, the hair shapes that don't even make any sense but still look awesome. But the whole thing just screams thorns, right? And because I think Vincent Valentine, I don't know if this is a spoiler, but your boy's a vampire. And just like the aesthetic of just like having, the red cape / sort of like scarf situation flow on like sanguine blood, and the sort of like the dark, black clothing that like represents, the more shadowy vibe of like this horrific theme, ties together in a really beautiful way that shows an edge. It shows someone who is. There's also a bit of like gothic romance to it. It's also kind of like romantic in a way, which I really appreciate, and I'm all about that. But I remember being in love with this without even realizing why. And then you got a set of course, the armor highlights the boots and the one arm, and then for some reason the gun in the hand. This sort of the design really spoke to me, and I think like also like fashion is in design are one and the same, I feel, because as when you're putting on clothes, like I remember someone, I don't remember where the quote is from, but it was like saying how like fashion is the armor or the message that you choose to show the world. And I think that like that's a design, you're trying to get an idea and a message across, and so you wear the items that sort of show that. And Vincent Valentine's all about that edgy, darkness, shadow, and I appreciate it a whole lot. And so this is probably influenced, the dark, brooding clothes, the goth aesthetic that I wear now. So I don't know. I feel like the influence is there very clearly. Second one I had is Emily Coleman from Dishonored 2. I love this game, and the art in this is sublime. But the sort of aesthetic of having, this beautiful regal coat that's got this intricate gold design to it, the sharp angles, and the I just love a bit of a shoulder padding. You know what I mean? We love that, but just also like making it functional as well. Like she's fully covered up in like clothing that can is like allows for flexible movement, but also giving that air of regality to her as well. And I just love. You can see on the side over here, the coat is asymmetrical, like it just cuts off in a weird angle, which is really cool because Dishonored was about assassinations and stabbing, stealth, and ominous powers, and like having Emily Coleman's design be so centered around sharp angles, as in daggers and knives, really accentuates that whole like I'm dangerous. It sends the message that I'm dangerous, while also the coat and the sort of like the clean cut fits show that precision, and also shows like this air of like aboveness. You know what I mean? Which I'm a big fan of. We love that. We love that here in this household.
The
we
whole
love that.
design is like she is a knife.
Yeah,
Yes.
she is literally a knife. Yeah. So
I love the articulation at the knees.
yeah, right.
So good.
Oh my god. Blessed. If you have a chance, this is not a sponsored thing, but if you have a chance, buy the Dishonored 2 art book, because that is my favorite. It's real good. But yeah, Emily Coleman, thumbs up. And lastly, I've got Hawk, specifically the mage armor design from Dragon Age. I think that you'll start to see, I really like sharp things and sharp angles. But again, also most of these games that I'm playing are combat focused, so it kind of makes sense that they're not like rounded off. But I remember seeing this design and thinking that's so non-functional in the way that like you're gonna poke someone's eye out, but it looks so good. And I think it's just like the aesthetics of having a silhouette be cut into at all costs, and this like dangerous vibe to it. Also, we love a bit of fur around the colors, having that like jutting out. I forgot what they're called, but the metal piece of armor that juts out like that. Also, the fact that Hawk is straight up wearing denim.
Never noticed
which is
that.
wild to me. Yeah, right? Yeah. straight up wearing denim, denim and chainmail. It's gonna be a thing. Trust me, put all your stocks into that because we're looking into the future of fashion. But no, it's also really interesting because Hawk's story was about sort of I think it was kind of just the lower class sort of like clambering upwards, and so having clothing just choices like denim or just like ragged sort of like the chainmail is like cut off to her to their sleeve, and just like having this more almost like relatable to the lower class aesthetic. It's not high-end fashion. In fact, this is cobbled together, and it's kind of just like this is what this person could like piece together to like function and look freaking good while doing it. But yeah, it's not this as a contrast to Emily Caldwell. It's not this like regal, precise like I am the heir of superiority. In fact, this is more just like I am fighting for everything that I've got. And that's the sort of message that's being sent here. And yeah, just like having straight up just like denim sort of just like shows like the working class sort of like vibe going on, which I thought it was really interesting and really cool how like these designs could say different things. But yes, but let's move on to some application. This is where it kind of gets a bit weird because I've just listed a whole bunch of like jagged shapes and armor designs, but the game that we're working on, of course, in Adventure Musical is a lot more modern sort of clothing. But we'll see if you can find anything. I'll go through the aesthetic choices that we made throughout. So here, moving left to right, is Pan, Freddie, Grace, Apollo, and Persephone. And so the aesthetic, so the brief sort of that I had for each of them, Pan is this sort of like sleazy character. So he's kind of he had the look of like a car salesman vibe to him almost, but like there's a lot of he's wearing clothes that seem to they work together, but they're not fitting well. And so this the note that I wrote in the reference sheet was Pan looks like he bought all these clothes at Big W or or like Target or something and just like cobbled together, not fitted at all, and it sort of shows like this I hope it sends the message of someone who does like take enough care about his appearance that he will like color coordinate or just like think about color schemes, but also at the same time doesn't care enough that he needs to be precise and well fitted or anything and look like he knows exactly what's going on. In fact, he wants to be a little bit more relatable, to the people that he talks to. Next up, we've got Freddie, who's sort of got this like, I kind of visualized it as like indie folk singer vibe, which is like the big round hat and the long sort of blazer coat, sort of shirt tucked into the high rise jeans and the sort of like ripped around the knees and stuff. It's sort of just like it's street, but it's not street. It's like sort of she has a poise to her, but it isn't so far-fetched that it's just like hyper-tailored suits or anything. She's kind of like in that middle where she's finding a lot of creative expression from keeping it nice and orderly while also embracing a sort of chaos or a life to her, you know what I mean? And so I thought that was really cool. But Grace in the middle is the main character of the game. She wears a lot of, big old leather boots, denim jeans, leather jacket that's sort of cropped. We actually changed her design recently, but this is an old image from the Fig campaign that launched a while back. But we changed her design so that she would have a high-rise jeans as well, and the shirt tucked into that, because I think it's really important that we listen to women's voices in the industry. And so a lot of like our art team, which is composed of primarily women, were speaking up and saying, "Hey, I don't think that Grace would actually wear this." And I was like, "Interesting. Tell me why." We sort of like delved into it. So this is a bit of an outdated design, but yeah, the core remains that Grace is supposed to be your sort of like punk rocker girl who is less about disrupting and shaking the foundations of the established order, and more just this person who is a bit of a chaotic person who relates to one another. Like she has to look sort of like a badass, but also has to look like someone who you would get a drink with, and just have a casual chat with. So her aesthetic is kind of a lot of casual badass kind of vibe to it. You know what I mean?
Nice.
Leather jackets do that. And we got Apollo, which is really interesting because he's a very his vibe was that he's a depressed sun god. And what does a depressed sun god wear? He's sort of like flawlessly, sculpted with like super ripped and shredded, but all his clothings are sort of like loose fitting almost, or just like thrown together. And so for him specifically, I looked into a lot of bohemian, boho, I think it's called, as a fashion style. And so it's just like really rugged and like open sort of aesthetic, but sort of like thrown together rather than like neatened and tightened up or anything. It's just sort of thrown together, and he just like flawlessly aesthetic. And my art team hates me for this, but I've also given him little yellow flip-flops. It's a sun god. Why would he need to cover anything? And so they hate me for that, but I stick to my guns. Yeah, the little toes out. But yeah, it just has this like carefree sort of attitude that he's kind of got without being carefree, because he's very sad. Sorry?
I don't know if you've seen recently, Ben, Peter Quill's Star-Lord in the comics has undergone a bit of a redesign.
Oh, really?
I think it's a matter of like, you both had the same brief, a depressed sun god, and the design is so similar. It's awesome.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'll have to show you later. It's awesome. It's great.
Let me witness.
I mean, this is like the best compliment, but I can absolutely see him like just being that like one dude at a music festival, just like like all the friends are having a good time, and he's like, no, I don't want to go to this place, this stage, and he's just like sitting in the tent or whatnot.
Yeah, he's just like, I'm good here. I'm appreciating music. I'm good here, and he's just like gently swaying, I guess. Yeah, that's definitely Apollo. But yeah, last off we've got Persephone, who's the high-end fashion sort of person, and she sort of like decks herself in jewelry and like silkware and like this like beautiful like kimono and long draping to extend her like height stature, right? She is trying to like the message that she's trying to send is power. Like, I have amassed extreme power. And so like this sort of like regal look to her, with some like the sort of red sort of color schemes denoting like her sort of like dangerous aspects, but as well as that an aesthetic of a rose. She's got the color scheme of a rose, like the red and green situation, and the green sort of like talks more about the her being the goddess of like vegetation. Words escape me, but that sort of thing. So she's like, Persephone has always been an interesting one, being about like death as well as like a life in a sort of way, and so it's reflected in this design where she's got this like powerful, don't look at me or don't touch me kind of vibe.
I love the contrast between Persephone and Pan, where if you look at their outfits reasonably, if like either leans one way or the other, they could both be as well or poorly dressed as each other. But your eye for detail really sets them apart. Like, Pan's is just the color, like it's less classy and it's less fitting. And if you went the other way, if you're like, okay, Pan's got, more striking considered colors and it's more better fitting, and Persephone looks like she got a gown from Big W, like they could swing the complete other way. But because of the attention to detail that you have, you really set them apart in spite of being so similar in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Blessed.
Mwah.
Thank you.
It's
so good.
Thank
beautiful.
You. yeah, and it's a lot of like the design was like, if I was this character, what would I dress like? Just like in the same way that I wake up every morning and consider what I'm dressing as, like what message do I want to send, or what do I have available to me? Like the thing that you brought up about like a lot of fashion is locked off from people because of like the high price tag, and so like you got to consider what sort of money does this person have, and how much are they able to afford, and so that's like going into the mind of these characters and sort of being like, what are the resources available to me? What are the things that I care about? And what sort of like message do I want to portray in the world as I continue to live in it? And that's how we live out our lives. So, extending that to video game characters is I think important. But
recently my partner that because she's on your team, Sash, and I watched
yes.
The Crow. And in The Crow, there's a little orphan street girl wearing a pair of Doc Martens, and it totally pulls you out of it. Because you're like, that little shit can't afford no Doc Martens. What kind of costuming choice was this?
Yeah. Imagine just like someone from an orphanage, just like grime all over their hands, and then like full on like Nike kicks or Tiaga. It's like, wow, gotta misunderstood what's going on here. But but this is a more like modern aesthetics, like fashion choices. But all the inspirations that I had given before, you can kind of see it as well, like the sort of like I love coats, and there's a lot of coats, a lot of jackets going on here. Just like silhouette changes and shapes like modified from that. But those influences that I picked up before are more evident in the paintings that I do, because I also do illustrations, so I also prepared some of that. Oh, here's just a little cheeky image that I did before when we were doing our promo, and it was kind of just like this like fashion photo shoot, or like a band photo shoot where everyone's sort of like together, which I thought was really neat. It was important that we had everyone sort of look like they could exist in the real world, including gods. And so like the sort of like clues that we give about what the gods are in there in the design choices, like Persephone's like vines all over the sleeves of the jacket, which is now changed. Again, that's another design that has since changed. But like Apollo's like sun pendant that he's got on him. Pan just straight up has horns, so it's less of a thing. But it's important that they look like they could exist in the real world. While if you had the know-how, you could see how they tie into what they truly are. But anyways, so this is a painting that I did, and you can see already like the Hawk the mage armor design coming into the fur coming around. Vincent Valentine's tattered cloak in the background. And just sort of like the almost uniform look that Emily Coleman had. You can see it in here as well. Here is just a swords, armors.
Yes.
We love that. Swords and armors combining with like cloth. Again, more tattered. We love a tattered look. And sort of just like jutting out shapes to like emphasize a regal but dangerous sort of aesthetic. And here is straight up Emily Caldwin with the sort of like regal coat situation. You can say I like swords quite a lot.
I love it.
Thank you.
Great.
But yeah, just like this flowing, like regal, sort of like orderly precision look was important to this character that I drew as well. But yes, this is probably that you're thinking. I understand now you are a fashion god. That was my presentation.
Yay!
Hey!
How
so
did you know?
How did you know? Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, it's really
Um,
I really love the way that that Joel sort of encompassed this like almost world building view in terms of fashion, and the way that you helped take that world view and then started to like drill down into the character development and how so much of a character's design and what you can read through them can immediately be read by the clothing that they wear. So again, I thought you did great.
Oh, bless it. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was panicking during that. I was like, oh my God, did I do the wrong thing?
Not at
Oh my
all.
God.
No.
Yeah.
Like fashion, there's so many different ways to interpret things. So you brought
Ah,
yourself.
very good.
It was like really cool to hear the thought process behind the different characters and whatnot, and like
Mhm.
how you've kind of integrated that, like, because I mean you've got everything available to you, right? And it's so cool to see like the integration of that into those characters and
Hmm.
how you've encapsulated their personalities while still like, I don't know, give them a sense of like mysteriousness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Bless it.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And last but not least, we have Izzy, who's going to be sharing a
Oh,
little bit about her inspirations.
so I also think I completely misinterpreted
No,
the
we can't
thing.
say that because, again, you didn't miss it, you just interpreted it differently.
Yeah. I'll just stop recording. You can probably see
Yes,
this.
I love this topic already.
Oh,
So let me.
whoa.
What I might do is I might record it twice just in case OBS fucks up. So
Yeah.
that will be on me. Oops, I had a timer on my phone, so I'll just restart that. So just gonna talk about Sailor Moon and Chanel, and I guess magical gals, and kind of the concepts that, because Intergalactic Space Princess is based on a lot of tropes in magical girl kind of things. And so what I did is I kind of took three kind of real life examples and how I integrated that into my game, despite it being like a magical girl game. So the first one, but I did want to actually kind of this. It's funny because like I had this slide before you even like talked about that, because I was actually going to talk about how inspired I am by the fashion in Humankind Revolution, but I was like, be more wholesome. So so I Sailor Moon. Yeah, I might re-record this because I'm very nervous. I'm also drawing my face downstairs.
Yeah.
You're doing great.
But it's amazing to see how much of the there's so much fashion influence that is there and kind of like just integrated really naturally into the show. Like for example, the Princess Serenity dress was actually inspired by a Dior dress. But not everything has to be like high fashion. Like a lot of the girls, what they were wearing is the Shibuya casual style, which is a fashion trend in Japan that emerged in the late 1980s and early 90s, and it was influenced by American and French designers in kind of Japanese fashion, and as well as like the sailor uniform, sorry, the magical girl transformation. Their uniform was actually inspired by ice skaters because it like kind of attracted freedom of movement, as well as like just the aesthetic and that kind of like flexibility. Before then, magical girls had kind of been inspired, like at least the transformed one was either by idols or even the 1960s TV show Bewitched. But it is worth noting that before Sailor Moon came out, a lot of the showrunners were actually men. And so it's really interesting to see what a female director and showrunner had on it. Just after Sailor Moon came out was Cardcaptor Sakura, which was also a group of females who came up with that. While it is more like costuming, both of those shows, especially like kind of set the tone and mood for a lot of the magical girl animes going forward. And a lot of the stuff on Sailor Moon was actually kind of directly inspired by the runway, which was really, really cool to see. And while not, as has been pointed out, while not everything is haute couture's accessible, it's kind of cool to see like these fantasy villains wearing like Terry Mugler and Jean-Paul Gaultier and like Christian Lacroix and Christian Alcoa. I'm just probably like butchering everyone's names. I'm so sorry. So an iconic dress that I wanted to talk about that kind of brings me onto my next topic is the chain dress by Chanel. So that dress was really, really important because before then, Chanel was the brand that made the little black dress famous. And when she had died, the brand kind of was getting a lot more like outdated. It was kind of what your grandma, like you'd associate with your grandma. And so when Karl Lagerfeld took over the brand, this was his kind of like Chanel was absolutely kind of on the way out. And so what he did was he had the nostalgia of the little black dress, and he kind of like updated it and made it like on trend but still had that like shout out to like the nostalgia, which really put Chanel back on the map. So it was really, really cool to see like those fashion moments being worn by characters in Sailor Moon. So like I really, really, really like the fact that the two are so beautifully integrated. Which kind of brings me onto what kind of inspired like the Space Princess outfit, which is the little black dress, but in Space Princess case, it's the little yellow dress. So this was kind of the first example of the little black dress. It's so Chanel, it was made famous in 1926. Before then, little black dresses, black was kind of considered a funeral cover, and women were also expected to have multiple change of outfits. So the reason why I thought like a equivalent of like a black dress where like that a magical girl would wear is because of its versatility. Like you can have it dressed up and dressed down. And it kind of really did shake up the industry. So there's like a number of different shapes that you can have for the like the little black dress, whether it's like a bubble or an A-line. And there's a lot of things that you can do to kind of make it your own, because I have multiple characters wearing the same yellow dress because it's their take on a costume. So it's really interesting because it's the same concept done so many different times. So for example, the Dior 1960s one is a lot more what Malene wears. There's also like the Givenchy one from the 1960s. And so it was kind of like that was my inspiration for like coming up with the characters like costuming and how she would do it. But there's also her nemesis Whitney, who also wears like a Space Princess costume. But for her, I wanted to make it a little bit more updated, so I took homage, which brings me into my other inspiration, which is teen fashion and films. So it was directly inspired by the kind of Santa Claus outfit in Mean Girls.
Yes.
So the thing that I really like about teen fashion in films is each of the characters, they have their uniforms, but they wear it with their own personality. And so the other thing that I think is that I'd love to see more in games, and that I'm really trying to integrate, is the way that fashion kind of shows character evolution throughout the film. So, for example, in Mean Girls, like you see Katie, she's wearing like flannelette, like very muted colors. Even for the like on Wednesdays we wear pink. Her shirt is like a lot like obviously it isn't her shirt; it's a Damien shirt, but it shows kind of like that character moment where she feels very, very out of place. And then by the end of the film, she's wearing what the plastics are wearing, And even the dress scene where she's hosting her own party and she excludes Regina George is actually really interesting because her dress is exactly the same color scheme and shape as Regina George's, but instead of a vertical stripe, but it has a black and pink kind of color scheme to it. And then you see Regina George with the accident and the belts for her braids actually kind of work as the reverse of that. And so it's really interesting to kind of see like the character growth through fashion, through films like that. And then by the end of the film, she's kind of back almost to where she started, but with like a little bit more glammed up version. So for so I guess working in those concepts, it's when I was like designing the kind of magical girl outfit, I wanted Malene's to like appear homemade, not trendy, wants to be as accurate as possible to the original costume and on the cheaper end. So it was like trying to work out what things cosplayers would do versus Whitney, who she put it herself together, but the parts are bought. She's a lot more trendy. The accessories are a lot more fashionable. But I guess like I think things to think about going forward in games. If you're designing your own characters, is like what's the time period, the wealth status of the characters? Do they care about fashion? Who do they look up to? And where is the character in their arc? And so yeah, that's kind of a very quick what my influences are for fashion and games, or at least integrated into my game.
That's awesome.
That was very good.
So, sorry that the slide didn't work.
That's it worked. We got it working. It's perfect.
I was following along.
I was just gonna say, I love the way that the three of your talks all tied together. Like again, going from sort of the big world perspective that Joel had, going into how you can learn about a character, and then now how you can evolve a character over time and like signify that evolution is just, I could like, this was perfect. So you did a great job.
Yeah, I thought it was a really cool, interesting point of just like introducing like it happens in movies all the time where like they're like the clothes that they change into throughout the movie is a metaphor for like where they're at, right? And like a lot of like because of like production costs and like limitations and stuff, they don't really do that a lot in games. But I think it's a really good idea to just like, I mean, I'm thinking about in Spider-Man PS4 when he gets his like suit all clawed up before he can finally fix it and get a customized new one. But like having a situation like that where like it evolves, maybe not necessarily through big events where like the suit is damaged and now whoa my god it's time for pain or anything like that, but more just like an evolution based on where that character is at and what they would choose to wear on that day because of where they're at. It's like it's a visual metaphor for the character growth and the progression of the narrative, which I think is really sick. And,
I don't know about you, but I am a sucker for a good time skip.
Yes!
Whether or not it lands pins entirely on what the characters are wearing after the time skip and what that says about what they've been through since then.
100%.
And if it doesn't make sense...
15.
Yeah, Final Fantasy 15.
Mwah.
So
Westwood wedding dress.
Oh good. Yes.
So good. That's what like one I wrote something down about that before when I was practicing in my head for how this panel would go. But yeah, like I was like thinking about how like it's good to pay attention to when there is a sequel of a game and like seeing when the design changes and why, and like thinking why has it changed that way, like what new purpose does it serve, and like what does it show about like what they've been through and how they choose to express themselves now. I think that's real interesting. And another point that you brought up during your presentation, Izzy, was manga influence which I thought was sick. I don't know about y'all, but I read Naruto growing up, and
Yep.
sometimes they would have like those promo arts where they would just like wear like modern clothing, and that was so sick. Yeah, big fan of that. Big fan of that.
Bleach, season 1,
Oh,
first opening, so fashion. so like completely defined
Yeah.
my 2000s street fashion.
yeah, precisely. Oh my god.
Yeah. Awesome. So as we're closing out, just like a quick statement on where do you think fashion is going next in terms of video games and just what we might see in the future.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot more commercialization of fashion in video games. We're seeing a lot more collaborations as brands try and find their ways into the hobbies that more and more people are partaking in, especially as we're spending more and more time inside. And I think that trend is going to continue to increase. But I think more importantly, video games are going to continue to be an outlet that exposes people to fashion and looks that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to access. And that will continue inspiring people, and that will continue to inform the media that is released in the next 10 years, and that will continue to inspire people. And I think my hope is that more people that were previously uncomfortable with expressing themselves through fashion and considering how they dress feel more comfortable to explore that, because I think it's a really fun, wild, interesting world.
Yeah, I'm thinking about. I recently played the game, The Artful Escape, in which at a certain period of the game, you can fully choose to clothe your character however you'd like, and like there was other options of like exploring like gender expression, like or gendered clothing, where it's just like wearing your character now wears a skirt and stuff, and it's just like really interesting because they don't make a big deal out of that. You just like choose however you want to dress, and like having that as a means to like express yourself and like try out something that you were thinking about or didn't have the language to express or didn't have the money to express, or having like a safe environment to like choose around that is really interesting and really cool. And yeah,
man.
I think that
There's a whole talk we could have
Yeah.
about gender in
yeah.
programming and development, because that shit doesn't exist in code until we put it there.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's a really cool idea, especially because in that game it's just kind of like explore your truest self is like the sort of message that it's trying to give. And so when you get to that part when you're just like clothing yourself however you want, it really is just like, if I had no limitations, what would I choose to wear? And that's so powerful. Yeah, for sure.
Like everyone was saying, I definitely see it. Again, being more of an expression like of how do you want to dress yourself, like, and especially like I think when there becomes more collaborations as well, like even not as like a character perspective, like even just you like in Pokemon or whatever, where it's like you're still like it's still like limited options, but you can still like choose. You're not so much playing as a character rather than like this is what I kind of what my like avatar wants to be and whatnot. And it's really, I think, interesting seeing kind of like as everyone said, the trickle down effect, like being able to wear like $2,000 items that you could never afford, but like kind of going around. And also I think it's really interesting to see, I guess, online play and fashion and how it's, because fashion is so like it like I don't know about you, but for our isolation, I'm not wearing my good dresses.
Same.
I'm not wearing sequins in isolation. But I think so much of fashion is like, how do you want to be seen as? And with a lot more games and online play and brand integration and whatnot, I think we're going to see and as you guys said, a lot more self-expression, but a lot more like self-expression almost as like a, this is who you are, if that makes sense. Yeah, that's
Awesome. Yeah, well, this has definitely gotten me excited to just start digging more into fashion and games. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and your experience and your stories. Before we finish out, really quickly, if you wanted to share just again your name, just so folks are reminded where folks can find you, and if you have anything that you'd like them to check out, if they're interested, that would be awesome. And we can start with Joel.
Yeah, again, I've been Joel Davison. I stream at twitch.tv/buyinjd. You can also find me on Twitter at buyinjd, and stream Gadigal Land by Midnight Oil.
Oh,
Perfect.
very good. Seamless.
Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
I'm Benjamin E. Some call me Ben. You may call me Ben as well if you'd like. But I can be found at pretty much anywhere under the handle The Boy of Cheese. So find me there. I'm currently working on Chorus and Adventure Musical. Have a little quick search of that and see if that's something that you want to check out, because I'm excited, and yeah, good times are happening.
I'm Izzy, and you can find me on Twitter at Trebet, although I've pretty much been off Twitter, which I'm very happy about.
Yes. Tell us what it's like.
Oh god, it's so much nice. Definitely recommend Twitter detox. Sorry, that's a bad way to advertise my life.
That's honest. Yeah.
My dead social media account. But if you want to see any photography that I've done, because I do a little bit, OGs on Instagram. That's probably the most updated I do, which isn't that updated. Although I do sometimes do an outfit of the day, maybe. And then my game is Intergalactic Space Princess. So. Yay.
Yay.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for hosting.
Yeah, of course. Thank you
Jenny.
for letting me
Incredible.
just hang out and be in awe of all your amazingness.
Oh, blessed.
Yay.
Incredible
And
hosting.
yeah, and thanks to the event organizers for having us. Hope you all are enjoying a good festival, convention. I don't know what to call it in the digital space anymore. I hope you're enjoying the event. And yeah, we'll all see you later.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.